Romans 4:18 through 22. In hope he believed against hope, that he should become the father of many nations. And as he had been told, so shall your offspring be. He did not weaken in faith when he considered his own body, which was good as dead, or when he considered the barrenness of Sarah's womb. No unbelief made him waver concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God, fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised. And that is why his faith was counted to him as righteousness.
Well, hello and welcome, especially to those who are visiting with us. We're so grateful that you are our guest today and thankful that you have come our way to encourage us. Hope is an interesting idea. We need it both individually and collectively. Have greater success when we are hopeful. Psychologists tell us that we train efficiently when we have hope, especially in the midst of adversity and uncertainty. Without hope, we look around and pictures leak. Just imagine if you're in an army and the army does not have hope that it's going to win. It's going to be overtaken really quickly. You look around us and there's suffering, there's wars. Ooh, suicide, they give up their hope. And when we have no hope, anxiety and despair, they creep in. Because hope is expectation, something desirable, or is the expectation of something better than what we have right now. But to have requires evidence. You need something on which you can base your hope. For example, if I said, I hope I can fly like Superman. Why are you all laughing? Because you completely understand there is no evidence that that is going to happen. You're going to ask my girls, are you going to get a car for Christmas? There's no hope there. There's no evidence. So the question becomes then, when we think in those terms, well, what is it or who is it in which we place our hope? So I want us to think about that this morning. Just begin this morning to think, well, how does hope work? When we think about biblical hope, one of the words that is used for that, especially in Hebrew, is kavah, which is the idea of waiting in expectation for something to happen. Now, hope is different from optimism, because optimism looks at situations and to sees how circumstances can come about, work for something better or for the best. But biblical hope is something different, because biblical hope is based on a person, not circumstances. Circumstances can change. Circumstances can be worse than what they are right now. We see biblical hope is based on a person. It is based on God and His character. Notice Psalm 30, verse 5 beginning. The psalmist there says, I wait for Yahweh. My soul waits. And in His word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than the watchman for the morning, more than the watchman for the morning. Well, what is it? Why is this person waiting? And in whom? Why is he waiting on the Lord? Well, verse 7. O Israel, hope in Yahweh. For with Yahweh there is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption. There is the assumption that he is going to work. He's going to act. Psalm 39 and verse 7 says, Now, O Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in you. We might look at this and say, well, but why is hope in God? Why isn't it in something else? Why isn't it in circumstances? Why isn't it in other people? The reality is, we are limited beings. We are limited in our spiritual, our emotional, our mental, physical abilities. Way. How many of us have done that? You know, I think all of us could probably say at some point in time, I fell down the stairs. And there are those times where we recognize that we are limited. We're limited in our wisdom. We're limited in our righteousness. We're limited in our strength. And while there are times where we put our hope in situations or in people, many times we make good-hearted promises to realize that we cannot keep those promises because of our limitations. Has there been a time where you knew that somebody was in you, and then you realized, I'm going to let them down because of my limitations? Can't be in two places at once. Maybe that I just don't have strength to do that, or the case may be. All of us have faced our limitations that say, do that. Begin to look at situations with the perspective of our limitations, and things begin to look impossible. You see, we place our hope in God because God is unlimited. He's not controlled by forces of nature. He's not chained to events of history or unfolding situations. He has unlimited power, unlimited strength, unlimited ability. He created everything, and everything that has been created does His bidding. Such that there is nothing that God has promised to do, or that we need Him to do, that He will not do. What He has promised will be fulfilled. All things are possible with God. So that biblical hope is the choice to wait for God to bring about a future that is much better than we can comprehend. Look at an example. An example of hope against. As was read for us, Romans chapter 4, verse 18, there it says, even when there was no reason, Abraham kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations, for God had said to him, that's how many descendants you will have. If you try to put yourselves in Abraham and Sarah's shoes, they had everything against them. There is no logical reason. Abraham, you're going to have. Time was against him. Nature was against both he and Sarah. And yet, Abraham hoped in God's promises. You see, God's promises are the evidence God called Abraham out of the land of Ur. I want you to go to a different place. He's 70 years old when that happens. God says to him, I am going to make you a great nation. And he goes on to say, in your seed, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's God's promise to him. In Genesis chapter 15, God reaffirms that promise to Abraham. Years have gone by. And I imagine just like you and I, if we were in his situation, we'd be wondering, is this really going to happen? God takes Abraham out on a clear night and he says, Abraham, look up at all the stars. Count them if you can. Because your descendants will be like this. He's reaffirming this is going to happen. In Genesis 17, God gives Abraham, now he's 99 years old. He gives Abraham the sign of the covenant, his circumcision. This is going to come true. In Genesis chapter 21, verse 1 beginning, it says, Yahweh visited Sarah as he had said, and Yahweh did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. God was not limited by time or age of Abraham or Sarah. God was not limited by the womb of Sarah. There was no human limits or otherwise that prevented God from doing what he had promised. Impossible is possible with God. Here then is the true basis, if you will, for hope. And that is God's past faithfulness gives the evidence to hope in him for the future. But someone might say, well, I get that, but God was talking directly to Abraham. I could hope in God if he talked directly to me. But that doesn't happen to me every day. Well, let's look at God's promises. God fulfilled. When Adam and Eve chose to rebel against him, God shows what is happening now, that there is this separation. I am promising that I this. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, you speaking to the serpent and the woman. And between your offspring and her offspring, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. God fulfilled that promise when Jesus was born into this world. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8. The Son of God appeared for this purpose, to destroy the works of the devil. That's what all those years ago we might say, well, wait a minute, when is this going to happen? Is it going to happen? If you just continue throughout history, you might say, I don't even know. Is God really going to go back on his word. And then Jesus comes. He fulfills that oldest promise. And also, in so doing, God fulfilled the costliest promise as well. I think my battery just died on my remote here, so we'll keep going as we go. Think about the costliest promise. And that is that because Jesus was born, that was a promise of his death. That he is saying, I am going to take care of all of this sin that is in the world. Sin requires the ultimate price, death. In so doing, it took Jesus to die for us. That is the costliest promise. And so what we find then is that Paul tells us in Romans chapter 8 and verse 32, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? That's what Paul says here. God's given the costliest thing that there ever is for you. And if that's the case, then there's nothing else he will spare to bring about your ultimate good. Nothing. So what we see then is that Jesus is the fulfillment of God's promises to redeem and restore humanity. His life, his death, his resurrection, all of that offer the hope of eternal life and reconciliation with God. It's what he has done. Such that we could say Jesus is God's yes. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 20. For all the promises of God find their yes in him. That is why it is through him that we utter our amen to God for his glory. All of God's promises find their fulfillment in Jesus Christ. He is the evidence. He is the fact for our hope. He proves that God will do what he says. But let's take that a step further. Let's think about hope displayed. Because Jesus isn't just the evidence for our hope. He is hope in bodily form. Think about what that means. Our expectation for something more desirable, something better than this life, cannot be based on our limitations. We're never going to get there. But Jesus comes along and says, I will give you something greater. I will show you something better than this life. Matthew records, Matthew's going back and looking at a passage in Isaiah 42. And in Matthew 12:18 it says, Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved, with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles, or to all nations. He goes on from there to say, a bruised reed he will not break. And then he comes to verse 21 and says, and in his name the Gentiles will hope. That's you and me. We are the Gentiles. And he is willing to be that hope for us. Because think about it. Think about all the limitations we have. And think about how Jesus goes beyond them. He went about in his life healing physical bodies. Whether it was a leper, a woman with the issue of blood. He says, I can make you whole. We can't really do that. Medicine might bring us a little ways along, but we don't have that ability. That's a limitation for us, not for him. He controlled the forces of nature. He said, peace be still to the wind and the waves. He walked on water. He multiplied food. He took 5 loaves, 2 fish, and fed over 5,000 people. Do you see my point? Is that he is showing us all the things that we have limitations on. He says, I don't. He rules over the spiritual realm. That which we maybe just have an inkling of, just a very small understanding of the spiritual realm. Jesus is going around casting out demons. He's saying, I am the ruler of the spiritual realm. So that all of the things that we would say are limitations, he shows us that he reigns over every one of them. Notice the way that the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 6 puts it. He says, we have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain. He's talking there about the tabernacle or the temple, that place where that was the presence of God, and only the high priest could go in. But he's talking about this idea of hope. But now notice how he transitions in verse 20, where our forerunner, Jesus, has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. He starts with the idea of hope, but he transitions and he says, Jesus is that hope for you and me. He is that anchor on which we hold when all around us is giving way. Someone might say, well, it's easy to sort of see the grand theme of hope. But how does that impact my daily life? I want you to just think about for just a moment what God was willing to do to bring hope into the world. Luke's gospel, the very beginnings of it, show us that God is influencing the entire Roman Empire to bring about a census that would come at the exact time to get an insignificant virgin to Bethlehem to fulfill prophecy with her delivery. Just think about all the things that we would say, if we tried to do that, how much that would be to get all of that lined up. God is influencing that for his purpose. Matthew's gospel, at the very beginning, displays God influencing the stars in the sky to get a small group of foreign wise men to Bethlehem so that they could worship the Son of God. Matthew says that the star stood over the place where Jesus was. Now, we can't go that route and go, well, how in the world did that happen? That's not for us to understand, but God is making that happen. And here's my point then. If God is willing to go to those lengths to work in the lives of what the world would see as insignificant people to bring about his will, consider the hope that you have that God is going to work in your life. Someone say, what then? What do I have? God has made you promises. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common God is faithful. And He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, He will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. Do you realize that is God's promise to you? Whatever you are going through right now, God is promising you you're going to be able to get through it. We may look at it and go, how in the world? I don't have the strength. And that's exactly what God is saying. I'm giving you the strength. I'm giving you the ability so that you can get through it. Romans 8, verse 28. We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. God says, I am going to work in your life. I will bring about good. It may not be the good that you think or the good that you expect. But He says, I will bring about the ultimate good. I will use the bad. I will use the negative in your life to bring good. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 6, and then 2 and verse 13. 1 verse 6 says, I am sure of this, that He who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Chapter 2 verse 13 says, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for His good pleasure. You might be facing a situation right now where you're like, what's the point? I am struggling. I've given my life to God, but things just seem so out of whack right now. What is the point? God, that is His promise to you. I am working in your life. Don't ever think otherwise. Because that is His promise. And God is faithful for all of the things that He has done. He continuously says to us, I will do what I have said. And therefore, because of the faithfulness in His past promises, we can be fully placing our hope in Him. That He will work in our life, He will bring better things than this brokenness that we live in. It may not happen in our life. But we are assured because of Jesus, because He is hope, of something better. That this isn't all there is. There's greatness and glory beyond our imagination that comes because of hope in God. So this morning I ask, who or what are you placing your hope in? If you really look at your life, are you placing your hope in something that has limitations? Is it in a person? Is it in a situation? Or is it in the unlimited King of Kings, who has no limits, no bounds? And He came into this world to show you what hope is all about. If you don't have that hope this morning, Jesus is calling out to you. He's inviting you into that hope of something better. To rid a life of sin, to put it behind you. Give your allegiance to Him. If you're in need of that, or if you're just in need of prayers, that invitation is open. Not because of us, but because of Jesus. If you're in need of it this morning, won't you come as together we stand and sing.